The classroom was cold. That was the first thing Day noticed every morning when he walked into Professor Velthar's xenobiology class. The alien station kept the temperature low for the comfort of most species, but humans always felt the chill in their bones. Day took his usual seat near the back, pulling his jacket tighter around his shoulders. Around him sat students from 15 different worlds. There were the tall, blue-skinned Kalari who never seemed to blink, the small, furry Piblings who chatted constantly in high-pitched voices, the massive, rock-like Granics who barely fit in the chairs, and 3 other humans, including Hana, who gave him a small wave from across the room. Professor Velthar entered, and the room fell silent. The professor was a Velthari, a species that looked like living crystal. Light passed through his body and reflected in rainbow patterns on the walls. His voice was sharp and precise like the sound of breaking glass. "Today we discuss your final examination," the professor announced. His multiple eyes swept across the classroom, making sure every student was paying attention. "You will travel to Virtus 9, a quarantine planet. There you will demonstrate everything you have learned this semester about dangerous alien species." A nervous murmur spread through the class. Virtus 9 was famous among students. It was a planet where the galaxy kept its most deadly creatures, the ones too dangerous to exist near populated worlds. Scientists studied them from a distance, behind barriers and shields. The professor touched a control panel, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed a creature that made several students gasp. The creature was huge, at least 4 meters long, with scales as black as space. It had 6 glowing eyes arranged around its head. Its mouth was full of teeth, each one as long as Day's hand. But the most terrifying part was its claws. They were folded against its body now, but even retracted, they looked like they could cut through steel. "This is the Kravix," Professor Velthar said. "It is the apex predator of Virtus 9. Nothing on that planet is more dangerous. Its venom can kill most species in 3 minutes. Its claws can cut through standard armor like paper. And it has never, in all of recorded history, been approached safely by any living being." The hologram began to play recorded footage. Day watched as military soldiers in full armor ran from a Kravix. Their weapons seemed useless against its scales. In another clip, a research team tried to approach with tranquilizer drones. The Kravix destroyed them in seconds. A third clip showed a containment team attempting to capture one. The Kravix tore through their electronic nets and vanished into the forest before they could react. "Every attempt to study this creature has failed," the professor continued. "Every attempt to tame it has resulted in casualties. Every attempt to even get close has ended in retreat. The Kravix represents everything we fear about Deathworld predators. It is aggressive, intelligent, and absolutely deadly." Day leaned forward in his seat. While the other students looked terrified, he felt curious. He watched the videos again as the professor repeated them. Something seemed wrong with the official story. In every clip, the humans and aliens approached the Kravix with weapons. They surrounded it. They tried to trap it, and every time the creature's first response was not to attack, but to retreat. It only fought when it had no other choice. "You will observe from safe distances," Professor Velthar said. "You will remain in your assigned zones. You will not under any circumstances approach a Kravix. This is not a suggestion. This is a rule that will keep you alive. Deathworld creatures like this do not think like civilized beings. They only know violence and hunger." Hana raised her hand. "Professor, the database says the Kravix is a pure carnivore, but the environmental reports mention fruit trees in its territory. Why would a carnivore live near fruit trees?" The professor's crystalline body flickered with annoyance. "Irrelevant details, student Hana. The Kravix hunts prey. That is all you need to know. Your questions should focus on safety protocols, not meaningless data." But Day made a mental note. Hana had spotted something interesting. Predators did not usually make their homes near fruit groves unless there was a reason. On Earth, many predators followed prey animals, and prey animals gathered where there was food. But fruit trees, specifically, that suggested something else. The class continued with Professor Velthar explaining the safety equipment they would use. Force fields, motion sensors, automated defense systems, everything designed to keep the students away from danger. But as Day listened, he found himself thinking about Earth. He had grown up near a wildlife sanctuary where his grandfather worked. His grandfather had taught him about animals, about understanding them instead of just fearing them. "Predators are not monsters," his grandfather used to say. "They are animals trying to survive just like everything else. If you want to understand them, You have to watch how they behave, not what people say about them. Day remembered watching wild dogs from a distance. Everyone said they were dangerous, that they would attack humans on sight. But his grandfather showed him the truth. The dogs were cautious. They avoided people when they could. They only acted aggressive when they felt trapped or when protecting their young. Once Day understood that, he stopped being afraid. He started seeing patterns in their behavior. Could the Kravix be the same? Was it really a mindless killer? Or was it just an animal defending itself? After class, Hana caught up with Day in the hallway. "Did you notice what I noticed?" she asked. "The fruit trees," Day replied. "Yeah, something doesn't add up." "I've been reading the environmental surveys from Virtus 9, Hana said. She pulled out her data pad and showed him charts and images. "Look at this. The Kravix territories are always near these specific types of trees. They produce fruits high in sugars and proteins. But the official classification says Kravix only eat meat." "Maybe the classification is wrong," Day suggested. "Or maybe no one has ever observed them long enough to see what they actually do," Hana added. "Every research team goes in with weapons and shields. The Kravix sees them as a threat and attacks. Then the team retreats and writes in their report that the creature is too aggressive to study." Day smiled. "You're thinking what I'm thinking. That the Kravix might not be the monster everyone says it is?" Hana grinned. "Yeah, but convincing Professor Velthar of that is going to be impossible. He's already decided that Death World creatures are all the same, violent and primitive." "Then we don't convince him," Day said. "We just observe. We follow the protocols, stay safe, and we watch. Really watch. Not through the lens of fear, but through the lens of understanding." Hana nodded. "My grandfather used to say something similar. He was a botanist on Earth. He said plants and animals evolve together. If the Kravix lives near fruit trees, there's a reason. Maybe it eats the fruits. Maybe it protects the trees from other creatures. Maybe it's more complex than anyone realizes." As they walked toward the dormitories, Day felt excitement building in his chest. The final examination was supposed to be a test of safety and survival. But for him it was becoming something more. It was a chance to see if humans really did have a different perspective on dangerous animals. It was a chance to prove that understanding was more powerful than fear. He just hoped he would get the opportunity to test his theory. And he hoped that if he did, he would be right. Because if he was wrong, the Kravix would not give him a second chance. The transport ship shook as it entered Virtus 9's atmosphere. Day gripped his seat, watching through the window as clouds gave way to an alien landscape below. The planet was beautiful in a strange way. Massive trees with purple leaves covered the ground like an ocean. Crystal formations jutted from the earth, catching sunlight and scattering it in brilliant colors. Rivers of water that glowed faintly wound between forests of giant mushrooms. "Attention, students," Professor Velthar's voice crackled over the intercom. "We will land in 15 minutes. Remember your assignments. Each of you has a designated observation zone. You will remain in your fortified stations at all times. The drones will monitor the surrounding areas. If any dangerous creature approaches within 500 meters, alarms will sound, and you will evacuate immediately to the transport ship." Day glanced at Hana, who sat across from him. She looked nervous but excited. They had spent the last week preparing for this moment. While other students studied safety protocols and emergency procedures, Day and Hana had researched everything they could find about Virtus 9's ecosystem. The more they learned, the more convinced they became that the Kravix was misunderstood. The ship landed with a heavy thud. The cargo door opened and warm, humid air rushed in. It smelled like Earth's rainforests, thick with the scent of growing things and damp soil. Day breathed deeply. After months on the sterile, climate-controlled station, the natural air felt wonderful. The students filed out, each following guide drones to their assigned zones. Day's zone was at the edge of a clearing near a dense forest. His observation station was a small reinforced building with thick windows and a secure door. Inside he found monitoring equipment, emergency supplies, and communication devices. But Day was more interested in what was outside. As soon as he set up his basic equipment, he stepped out to explore the immediate area. The clearing was full of the trees Hana had identified in her research. Their trunks were smooth and gray, and their branches hung heavy with strange fruits. The fruits were oval-shaped, about the size of his fist, with reddish-purple skin. Day carefully picked one and examined it. The skin was soft like a peach. When he pressed gently, it gave slightly. It smelled sweet, with a hint of something else he could not identify. He used his scanner to analyze it. The results showed high sugar content, significant protein levels, and several complex compounds. Some of those compounds were similar to Earth's anti-inflammatory medicines. Interesting, Day muttered to himself. He began collecting samples, placing different fruits in his specimen bags. Some were ripe, others less so. He wanted to understand what made these fruits special. His communicator beeped. It was Hana. "Dee, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Her voice was excited. "The fruits?" he replied. "Yes, but more than that. Look at the ground around the trees. Do you see the patterns?" Day looked down. At first he saw only fallen leaves and scattered fruits, but then he noticed what Hana meant. There were small piles of fruit rinds and seeds arranged in neat groups. The piles were too organized to be random. Something had been eating the fruits and leaving the waste in specific places. Something is collecting these fruits, Day said slowly, and it's being careful about it. Exactly, Hana confirmed. I'm seeing the same thing in my zone. And look at the trees themselves. See the scratch marks on the trunks? They're high up, at least 3 meters off the ground. Whatever is eating these fruits is big and can reach high. Dave felt his excitement growing. The Kravix. It has to be, Hana agreed. But why would a supposed carnivore spend time eating fruits? Unless it's not a pure carnivore, Dave finished. Unless it's omnivorous like humans. That would explain why it lives near the fruit trees. It's not following prey. It's living here because this is its food source. For the next 2 days, Day observed his zone carefully. He set up hidden cameras at different angles. He watched the fruit trees. He tracked the movement of small animals through the area, and he waited. On the second night, his cameras caught something. A large shape moved through the clearing under the moonlight. It was too dark to see details, but the size was right for a Kravix. The creature approached one of the fruit trees, stood on its hind legs, and carefully plucked fruits from the branches. It ate some immediately. Others it carried to a specific spot near the forest edge and placed them in a pile. Day watched the recording over and over. The Kravix's movements were deliberate and careful. It was not the mindless predator from Professor Velthar's lectures. It was an intelligent creature making choices, planning ahead, storing food for later. The next morning, Day went to the pile where the Kravix had left the fruits. He examined them closely. Some had been partially eaten. Others were untouched, as if saved for another time. The area around the pile was clean, free of debris. The Kravix was maintaining this spot, treating it like a cache or pantry. Day made a decision. He gathered the ripest, best-looking fruits he could find and placed them in his pack. If the Kravix was intelligent enough to select and store fruits, then it was intelligent enough to respond to an offering. He just needed the opportunity to test his theory. That opportunity came on the third day. Day was examining scratch marks on a tree trunk when his communicator suddenly blared an alarm. It was the proximity warning. Something large was approaching the research camp. All students evacuate immediately. Professor Velthar's voice was sharp with panic. Kravix spotted, moving toward the central camp. Get to the transport ship now. This is not a drill. Day could hear the distant sounds of students shouting and running. Automated defense systems activated with electronic whines. He pulled up his tracking screen and saw the red dot representing the Kravix. It was moving toward the camp, but slowly, not in a hunting rush. Everyone else was running away from the Kravix, toward the landing zone. But Day looked at his map and made a different choice. The Kravix was coming from the north. If he moved east toward a rocky ridge, he could intercept it without getting between the creature and the camp. It was dangerous. It violated every protocol, but Day's instincts told him this was not an attack. The Kravix was investigating something, probably the research equipment and activity in its territory. If he could reach it before it got to the camp, before the defense systems attacked it, he might have a chance to communicate. He grabbed his pack full of fruits and started moving. Behind him, he heard someone call his name. He turned to see Hana running toward him. "What are you doing?" she demanded, though her expression said she already knew. "The Kravix is not attacking," Day said quickly. "It's just curious. But if it gets to the camp, the defense systems will hurt it, and then it really will attack. I need to redirect it. With fruits?" Hana stared at him. "Dee, this is insane." "I know," he admitted. "But I'm right about this. I know I am. That creature is not the monster everyone thinks it is." Hana looked back toward the camp, then at Day, then at the path toward the ridge. "I'm coming with you," she said finally. "If you're going to do something this stupid, you need someone watching your back." Together they ran toward the ridge, racing against time and betting everything on Day's belief that understanding could conquer fear. The sounds of alarms faded behind them, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the pounding of their own hearts. Somewhere ahead in the alien forest, the Kravix was moving, and soon they would meet it face to face. The ridge was steep, covered with loose rocks that slid under their feet. Day and Hana climbed as quickly as they dared, breathing hard in the humid air. Behind them, the alarms from the camp continued to wail. Ahead, the forest was quiet. "Too quiet there," Hana whispered, pointing. Through the trees, they could see movement. Something large and dark was making its way through the underbrush. Day's heart hammered in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. He reached into his pack and pulled out the fruits, holding them carefully in both hands. They felt heavier now than they had before. Everything depended on whether he was right about the Kravix. If he was wrong, these fruits would be useless. If he was wrong, he and Hana would not make it back to the camp. The creature emerged into a small clearing at the base of the ridge. Day got his first real look at a Kravix, and for a moment his courage nearly failed him. It was even bigger in person than in the videos. Its body was covered in scales that looked like polished black stone. Each scale overlapped the next, creating armor that seemed impenetrable. 6 eyes, arranged in 2 rows of 3, glowed with a faint golden light. When it moved, muscles rippled under the scales like water. Its claws, retracted but still visible, looked sharp enough to cut through anything. But Day forced himself to look past the frightening exterior. He looked at how the creature moved. It was limping slightly, favoring its left hind leg. One of its eyes did not track properly with the others. There were scars on its scales, old wounds that had healed poorly. This was not a creature in its prime. This was an animal that had been hurt, probably by previous encounters with research teams and their weapons. "It's injured," Hana breathed beside him. She had seen it too. The Kravix stopped and raised its head. It had caught their scent. All 6 eyes turned toward the ridge, toward where Day and Hana crouched among the rocks. For a long moment, nothing moved. The whole forest seemed to hold its breath. Then the Kravix took a step forward. Then another. It was approaching slowly, carefully, its body low to the ground. It was being cautious, which meant it was intelligent enough to recognize potential threats. "Day," Hana whispered urgently. "What do we do?" "We show it we're not a threat," Day replied softly. "Stay calm. Move slowly. And whatever you do, don't run." Day stood up slowly, making sure his movements were smooth and predictable. He kept the fruits visible in his hands. Hana stood beside him, though he could feel her trembling slightly. He could not blame her. He was trembling too. The Kravix stopped again, watching them. Its head tilted slightly to one side, a gesture that reminded Day of a curious dog. It was trying to understand what they were doing. Why were these small creatures not running? Why were they standing still? Why were they holding those fruits? Day took a deep breath. This was the moment. Slowly, carefully, he walked down the slope into the clearing. Hana stayed on the ridge, ready to call for help if things went wrong. Every step felt like it took forever. The Kravix watched him approach, its body tense, ready to react to any threat. When Day was about 10 meters away, he stopped. Any closer and the creature might feel cornered. He knelt down, making himself smaller, less threatening. Then, moving very slowly, he placed the fruits on the ground in front of him. He arranged them in a neat pile, the way the Kravix had arranged its own food stores. Then Day did something that felt crazy, even to him. He sat down on the ground, crossing his legs, and placed his hands palm up on his knees. It was a position of complete vulnerability. He had no weapons. He had no defense. He was simply sitting there, waiting to see what the Kravix would do. The creature stared at him. Minutes passed. Day's legs began to ache from sitting still. Sweat ran down his back, though he was not sure if it was from the heat or from fear. He wanted to look away, but he kept his eyes on the Kravix, meeting its gaze calmly. Finally, the Kravix moved. It took one step forward, then another. It approached the pile of fruits, its movements cautious. It sniffed the air, analyzing the scent. One of its front legs reached out and tapped one of the fruits, rolling it slightly. Then, moving with surprising delicacy for such a large creature, the Kravix picked up a fruit. It brought the fruit to its mouth and bit into it. Juice ran down its jaws. The Kravix chewed slowly, its eyes never leaving Day. Day did not move. He barely breathed. This was working. The creature was eating. It had accepted the offering. The Kravix finished the first fruit and immediately reached for another. This time it ate faster with more confidence. It ate a third fruit, then a fourth. As it ate, Day noticed something. The creature's posture was changing. The tension in its muscles was easing. The aggressive stance was softening. It was relaxing. When the Kravix finished the last fruit, it sat back on its haunches and looked at Day. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Human and alien predator, separated by millions of years of evolution on different worlds, yet somehow understanding each other in this moment. Then the Kravix made a sound. It was low and rumbling, coming from deep in its chest. Not a growl, but something else. Something almost like a purr. The creature lowered its head slightly, a gesture that Day instinctively recognized as acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. Day wanted to reach out, to touch the creature, but he held himself still. This was enough for now. He had proven his theory. The Kravix was not a mindless killer. It was an intelligent being capable of understanding peaceful intentions. The Kravix stood up and took one last look at Day. Then it turned and walked back toward the forest. It moved with a slight limp, but its head was high. At the edge of the trees it paused and looked back once more. Then it disappeared into the shadows. Day let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. His entire body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding through him. He had done it. He had approached a Kravix and lived. More than that, he had communicated with it. Hana came sliding down the ridge, her face a mixture of amazement and disbelief. "I recorded everything," she said, holding up her data pad with trembling hands. "I got every second of that. Day, do you realize what you just did? That was impossible. Everyone said it was impossible." "It wasn't impossible," Day replied, standing up on unsteady legs. "It was just misunderstood. That creature is hurt and scared. Every time someone approached it before, they came with weapons and traps. Of course it fought back. But when we showed it, we meant no harm. When we offered it something it needed, it responded peacefully." "The fruits," Hana said. "It really was eating them regularly. Your theory was right." "Not just eating them," Day said, thinking about what he had observed. "Did you see how it reacted after eating? Its posture changed. It relaxed. I think those fruits have medicinal properties. Remember your analysis? They contain anti-inflammatory compounds. That Kravix is injured. The fruits help with pain. We didn't just feed it, we helped it feel better." They started walking back toward the camp. The alarms had stopped now. The Kravix had moved away from the research area, no longer a threat. As they walked, Day's mind was racing. This encounter changed everything. If the Kravix could be approached peacefully, if it could communicate and understand intentions, then it was not the monster the galaxy believed it to be. "Professor Velthar is going to be furious with us," Hana said. "Probably," Day agreed. "We broke protocol. We put ourselves in danger. We did everything he told us not to do. But we also proved that everything he taught us about the Kravix was wrong," Hana added. "That has to count for something," Day smiled. "Let's hope so. Because I want to go back. I want to learn more about that creature. I want to understand it, really understand it. And I don't think one meeting is enough." As they approached the camp, they could see the other students gathered around the transport ship. Professor Velthar stood at the center, his crystalline form flashing with agitation. When he saw Day and Hana walking calmly from the direction of the Kravix sighting, his entire body went rigid with shock. The real test was about to begin, not with the Kravix, but with convincing the rest of the galaxy that they had been wrong about these creatures all along. Professor Velthar did not speak for a full minute after Day and Hana showed him the recording. He simply stood there, his crystalline body flickering with colors that Dee had learned meant shock and confusion. The other faculty members crowded around the datapad, watching the footage of Day sitting calmly while a Kravix ate fruits just meters away. "This is impossible," Professor Velthar finally said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more frightening than if he had yelled. "You violated every safety protocol. You put yourselves in direct danger. You could have died. But we didn't," Day replied calmly. "Because the Kravix is not what you think it is. It's not a mindless predator. It's an intelligent omnivore that has been defending itself from what it perceives as attacks." "Perceives as attacks?" The professor's body flashed red. We have documented casualties from Kravix encounters. People have died. People who approached with weapons, Hana interjected. People who tried to capture or tranquilize them. Look at every recorded incident, Professor. The Kravix only attacks when cornered or when approached aggressively. Day went to it unarmed with food. He showed peaceful intentions. And the creature responded peacefully. A tall, elderly professor named Kerval stepped forward. She was a Kalari with blue skin and large, thoughtful eyes. I have studied predator behavior for 40 years, she said slowly. And I have never seen anything like this. If this recording is genuine, it contradicts decades of established xenobiology. It's genuine, Hana said firmly. I recorded it from the ridge. No editing, no manipulation. That is raw footage of exactly what happened. Professor Kerval took the datapad and examined it closely. She zoomed in on different sections, analyzed the metadata, checked the timestamps. Finally, she nodded. It appears authentic, which means we need to consider the possibility that our understanding of the Kravix has been fundamentally flawed. This is one incident, Professor Velthar protested. One creature that happened to accept food. It proves nothing. Then let me prove it, Day said. Let me go back. Let me observe the Kravix properly. Without weapons, without aggressive posturing. Give me time to study them the way my species studies animals on Earth. If I'm wrong, you can expel me from the academy. But if I'm right, you'll have to rewrite your entire classification system for Death World predators. The debate that followed was intense. Some professors argued that Day's success was pure luck, that he had simply encountered an unusually calm individual. Others pointed out that luck did not explain the creature's intelligence, its careful selection of fruits, or its organized food storage behavior. A few professors were openly angry, viewing Day's actions as reckless disregard for established knowledge. But Professor Kerval was fascinated. I want to see more, she said. If humanity has developed unique insights into predator behavior because of their own Death World origins, then we should learn from that perspective. Day, you will have your chance, but not alone. I will accompany you, and we will do this properly, with full documentation and safety measures. Professor Velthar was outvoted. 3 days later, Day found himself back on Virtus 9, this time with a small research team. Hana came as the botanical specialist. Professor Kerval served as the senior researcher, and 2 security personnel, both humans who had experience with wildlife on Earth, joined them as observers. They set up a simple camp near the clearing where Day had first encountered the Kravix. No weapons, Day insisted. If the Kravix sees weapons, it will perceive us as a threat. We have defensive shields, one of the security personnel, a woman named Mira, replied. We can activate them if there's danger, but we won't carry visible weapons. Every morning, Day went to the clearing with a basket of fruits. He sat in the same spot, waiting. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. The forest remained empty. He began to worry that the Kravix had moved on, frightened away by all the activity. But on the 3rd morning, the creature appeared. It emerged from the trees cautiously, its 6 eyes scanning the area. When it saw Day sitting with the fruits, it stopped. For a moment, Day thought it would turn and leave. But then the creature made a soft rumbling sound and approached. This time, Day had learned more. He placed the fruits on the ground but left one in his hand. He held it out, not moving, barely breathing. The Kravix came closer than before. It sniffed his hand carefully. Then, with surprising gentleness, it took the fruit from his palm. Incredible, Professor Kerval whispered from her observation point. Look at the precision. Those claws could easily cut him, but the creature is being deliberately careful. Over the following weeks, Day established a routine. He came to the clearing every morning with fruits. The Kravix, which Day privately named Jinwoo after his grandfather, began to anticipate these visits. Each day, Jinwoo came a little earlier. Each day, he allowed Day to get a little closer. Day began to observe details that the distant surveillance had missed. Jinwoo's limp was caused by an old injury, probably from a previous encounter with researchers. One of his eyes had a scar across it, affecting his vision on that side. These injuries explained why Jinwoo lived alone away from other Kravix. He could not hunt as effectively as healthy members of his species, so he relied more heavily on fruits and smaller prey. One morning, Day tried something new. After Jinwoo finished eating, Day slowly reached out his hand, palm up, fingers relaxed. He did not try to touch the creature. He simply offered the gesture. Jinwoo stared at the hand for a long time. Then, very carefully, he lowered his massive head and pressed his snout against Dae's palm. The scales were warm and smooth, like sun-heated stone. Dae could feel the creature's breath slow and steady. He applied gentle pressure and Jinwoo leaned into it slightly. Dae remembered his grandfather showing him pressure points on earth animals, places where they enjoyed being touched. Carefully, he moved his hand to the ridge behind Jinwoo's head and applied gentle circular pressure. Jinwoo's entire body relaxed, his eyes half closed. The rumbling sound from his chest grew louder, more content. It was definitely a purr. "He's enjoying that," Hana said softly. She had been recording everything. "Look at his posture. All the tension is gone. Dae, you're not just feeding him. You're providing comfort, maybe even relief from pain." "Those pressure points," Dae explained quietly, not stopping his gentle massage. "They're similar to ones on earth animals. Applying pressure there can ease muscle tension and reduce pain. If Jinwoo is hurt, this might help." Professor Kurval was making rapid notes on her datapad. "This changes everything we know about interspecies communication with Deathworld predators. The Kravix is not just intelligent, it's capable of trust. It's capable of forming bonds with other species." But the most significant discovery came in the 4th week. Dae arrived at the clearing one morning to find Jinwoo waiting with another Kravix. This one was smaller, younger, with brighter scales and no visible injuries. Jinwoo made a series of low rumbles, almost like he was communicating with the younger creature. "It's his offspring," Professor Kurval breathed. "He's introducing his child to you. This is deliberate. He's teaching the young one that you're safe." Dae's heart swelled. This was not just acceptance. This was trust on a profound level. Jinwoo was not only comfortable with Dae himself, but was willing to bring his vulnerable offspring into Dae's presence. The young Kravix was curious and cautious. It approached the fruit slowly, watching Dae carefully. When it ate, it mimicked its parent, taking the fruits gently. After eating, it sat next to Jinwoo and watched Dae with the same tilted head gesture of curiosity. Over time, Dae discovered there were actually 3 Kravix in the family group. Jinwoo, his young offspring, and an older female who was likely the mother. They lived in a small territory centered around the fruit groves. They were not isolated by choice but by necessity. Jinwoo's injuries made him a poor hunter, so the family relied on fruits and small prey. Other Kravix groups avoided them, seeing them as weak. They're outcasts, Dae realized. That's why Jinwoo is here in this territory that's been left alone. He can't compete with healthy Kravix, so he's adapted. He's become more omnivorous, more dependent on plants. And because he's had so many bad experiences with armed researchers, he's become defensive. The research team documented everything. The Kravix's social structure, their communication methods, their dietary needs, their intelligence and problem-solving abilities. Every day brought new discoveries that contradicted the official records. When it was time to return to the station, Dae felt genuine sadness. He had formed a bond with Jinwoo, something he had never expected to feel with an alien predator. On his last morning, he brought an extra-large basket of fruits and spent hours simply sitting with the Kravix family, memorizing every detail. Jinwoo seemed to understand this was goodbye. He pressed his head against Dae's chest, rumbling softly. It was a gesture of trust and affection that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. "I'll come back," Dae promised, though he did not know if the creature could understand his words. "I'll make sure you and your family are safe. I promise." The conference hall on Kepler 7 station was packed. Scientists from every major species in the galaxy had come to hear Professor Kurval's presentation. The title projected on the screens was simple, but revolutionary: Predator or Protector, Reassessing. Threat Classification Through Deathworld Perspectives. Dae sat in the front row between Hana and his parents, who had traveled from Earth for this moment. His mother squeezed his hand supportively. On stage, Professor Kurval stood beside a massive holographic display showing footage of Dae with Jinwoo. "For 70 years, Professor Kurval began, we have classified the Kravix as a Category 5 predator, untrainable, unapproachable, deadly. We based this classification on numerous encounters, all of which ended in violence or retreat. What we failed to consider was the nature of those encounters themselves." The hologram changed, showing old footage of military units approaching a Kravix with weapons drawn, drones surrounding it, containment nets deploying. The Kravix in the footage fought desperately, lashing out at everything around it. We approached. These creatures as threats, Professor Kervil continued. We surrounded them with weapons. We used tranquilizers and capture equipment. From our perspective, we were being cautious. From the Kravix's perspective, we were attacking. Every single encounter reinforced their fear and aggression toward us. The hologram shifted to Day's footage. The contrast was stark. Day sitting calmly, offering fruits, moving slowly and predictably. Jinwoo approaching with caution but without violence. The two of them sitting together peacefully. This human student did something we never considered. He approached without weapons. He offered food instead of force. He showed patience instead of imposing control. And the Kravix responded not with violence, but with communication. The audience murmured. Day could see skeptical expressions on many faces, but also curiosity and wonder on others. Professor Kerval played more footage. Jinwoo allowing Day to touch him. Jinwoo bringing his family to meet Day. The young Kravix learning to trust a human. Weeks of documented peaceful interaction that should have been impossible according to every established theory. The question we must ask ourselves, Professor Kerval said, is why did we fail to see this possibility? The answer is uncomfortable but necessary. Most spacefaring species evolved as prey animals. We developed intelligence to avoid predators, not to understand them. Our instinct when facing a creature like the Kravix is fear, followed by defensive aggression. She gestured to Day. Humans evolved differently. They come from Earth, a planet where predators were everywhere. To survive, humans had to understand predator behavior. They learned to read body language, to recognize the difference between hunting and defending, to see patterns that prey species miss. This perspective, this death world wisdom, allowed this young man to see what we could not. After the presentation, the debate was fierce. Some scientists argued that Jinwoo was an exception, that other Kravix might not respond the same way. Others pointed out that if even one Kravix could form bonds with other species, it meant the entire classification system needed review. A breakthrough came when a research team on another world tried Day's approach with a different predator species that had been classified as untamable. Using fruits, patience, and non-threatening behavior, they successfully made peaceful contact. Then another team succeeded with a different species and another. The evidence became overwhelming. Predators across the galaxy, previously thought to be mindlessly aggressive, were responding to understanding and respect. The problem had never been the creatures. The problem had been the approach. 6 months after the conference, the Galactic Xenobiology Council issued a complete revision of their predator classification system. The new guidelines required researchers to attempt peaceful contact before classifying any species as inherently dangerous. Weapons were banned from first contact scenarios, and significantly, humans were now specifically recruited for dangerous animal studies because of their unique perspective. Day was offered a permanent research position at the Institute, but he declined. Instead, he proposed something new, a field called interspecies behavioral psychology. It would combine xenobiology with psychology and animal behavior studies. It would focus on understanding rather than controlling, on communication rather than conquest. The Academy approved his proposal. Day became the youngest professor in the Institute's history. Hana joined him as his research partner, focusing on how plants and predators evolved together. Together, they began training a new generation of scientists in these principles. But Day never forgot his promise to Jinwoo. He returned to Virtus 9 regularly, bringing fruits and spending time with the Kravix family. Over time, Jinwoo's injuries healed better. The anti-inflammatory compounds in the fruits, combined with regular care and reduced stress, allowed his body to recover. His limp nearly disappeared. His vision improved. More importantly, Jinwoo and his family were no longer outcasts. Other Kravix in the area, seeing that the injured male had formed a bond with the strange two-legged creatures who brought good, Fruit began approaching the research camp with cautious curiosity. Day's team documented a complex social structure among the Kravix that nobody had known existed. They had languages, territories, and family bonds. They were not solitary predators, but social creatures who had been driven apart by constant harassment from researchers. The Galactic Council designated Virtus 9 as a protected sanctuary. The Kraviks could live there without interference, and research could only be conducted using approved peaceful methods. It was the first time in galactic history that a predator species was given such protection. 2 years after the initial encounter, Day stood in front of his first class as a professor. The students were a mix of species, including several humans who had specifically requested his course. They sat in the same lecture hall where Day had once listened to Professor Velthar declare the Kraviks untamable. Today, we're going to discuss what it means to understand a predator, Day began. Not to conquer it, not to control it, but to understand it. He projected an image of Jinwoo onto the screen. The Kraviks was lying in the sun, his offspring playing nearby, completely relaxed. This is Jinwoo, Day said. 2 years ago, he was classified as one of the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy. He had attacked research teams. He had destroyed expensive equipment. He was considered completely untamable. Every expert agreed that approaching him meant death. Day smiled at the memory. I approached him with a handful of fruits. Not because I was brave. Not because I was reckless. But because I looked at him and saw not a monster, but an animal. An animal that was hurt, scared, and defending itself the only way it knew how. He changed the image to show himself sitting with Jinwoo, the creature's head resting against his shoulder. My species survived on Earth by learning to understand predators, Day continued. We learned that predators are not evil. They are not mindless killing machines. They are animals with needs, fears, and logic. A predator attacks because it's hungry or scared or protecting its young. If you understand why it attacks, you can avoid triggering that response. One student, a young piebling with brown fur, raised a small paw. But Professor, your planet is a death world. You grew up with dangerous animals. How can species from safer worlds learn these skills? By changing your perspective, Day replied. Stop seeing predators as enemies. Start seeing them as fellow beings trying to survive. Watch their body language. Learn what frightens them. Understand what they need. Most importantly, never approach with violence unless you want violence in return. He picked up a basket from his desk. Inside were the same purple-red fruits that had started everything. Sometimes the most powerful tool we have is not a weapon or technology. Sometimes it's empathy. The ability to see from another creature's perspective. The willingness to offer something instead of taking. Day held up one of the fruits. This is worth more than any tranquilizer, any capture net, any armed drone. This is an offering of peace. This says, I understand you need food. I am not a threat. We can coexist. And incredibly often, if you approach with that mindset, the creature responds in kind. The students watched attentively. Even the ones from prey species backgrounds seemed engaged rather than fearful. Day felt proud. This was the change he had wanted to create. Not just understanding one creature, but changing how the entire galaxy thought about the animals they shared space with. After class, Hana found him in his office. The council approved our proposal, she said excitedly. We're going to establish sanctuary protocols for 12 more predator species across the galaxy, and they want you to train the research teams. Day felt a wave of satisfaction. This was bigger than he had imagined. What started with one scared, injured Kraviks and a handful of fruits had grown into a galaxy-wide movement. There's more, Hana added. Professor Velthar sent a message. He wants to apologize. He said he spent his whole career teaching people to fear death world creatures, and you showed him in one semester that fear was never the answer. Day thought about his former professor, so certain of his knowledge, so convinced that predators were simple, violent beings. Tell him I understand. It's hard to unlearn fear, but it's necessary if we want to truly.